Police Scotland say they've no intelligence indicating anything similar is being organised here, but the force says they're monitoring things closely. The unrest began earlier in the week following misinformation surrounding the fatal stabbing of 3 young girls in Southport on Merseyside. Let's speak now to Callum Steele, former chair of the Scottish Police Federation. So Callum, what are your thoughts then, firstly, on the pictures we've been seeing over the weekend?
I think any right-thinking human being will be of the view that the pictures are beyond disgraceful. They're almost reminiscent in terms of ferocity of the riots that took place in 2011. And I very much hope that in the same vein as the 2011 riots saw some exemplary sentences passed out, that the same thing happens here when the ultimate offenders are brought before the courts.
Well, we've heard from Police Scotland this morning, actually, and they say that there's no particular intelligence that any kind of similar events are planned here for now, but that's something that they will be closely monitoring.
Oh, absolutely, and there's no doubt that complacency would not be the friend of anyone at this moment in time. The fact that the riots and the disorder has undoubtedly been driven by the far right in England, across much of England, is something that mercifully Scotland doesn't have a huge history of. But I think it would be naive in the extreme to believe that everyone involved in the rioting will be directly associated or even indirectly associated with the far right, and they will just be venting their own grudges and grievances under the excuse of wider disorder and violence. And that potential very much can't be dismissed in Scotland, even though it's heartening to hear that at this time the intelligence doesn't point to it taking place anytime soon.
What do we know about the far right in Scotland then?
Well, even in terms of the anecdotes of our own experiences, we know that whenever there's been an attempt to establish any kind of far-right foothold in Scotland, that the Scottish public generally has no truck for them. And it may well be that the associated labelling of these riots and disorder by being far-right is enough of a deterrent to prevent those that are otherwise annoyed or vexed at whatever particular issue they have from taking to the streets under the wider banner of far right activity. I mean, I don't want to say that this is Nigel Farage's fault, but when we saw when Nigel Farage came to Edinburgh a few years ago that he was pretty much run out of town, and attempts to stir up far right sentiment in Scotland is usually met with a very strong counter narrative and demonstrations to again run them out of town. But we shouldn't be naive to the fact that those far right sentiments do exist. They exist in some way, shape, or form across the totality of the world, and Scotland would not be immune to that in any way, shape, or form.
I suppose the other factor is, this is something that the Prime Minister was saying yesterday, is that these groups of people are mobile. So we're not necessarily talking about Indigenous far-right campaigners in Scotland. Here we're talking about people from England who are just coming up, crossing the border to cause trouble.
Yeah, again, I think that would be slightly simplistic. The reality is that when it comes to people that are spoiling for a fight or spoiling for the opportunity to cause damage and mayhem, they've kind of always been mobile. Yes, there's an inevitability that there is a concentration of the local population that's at the heart of anything, albeit supplemented by those willing to cause disharmony. And in fact, probably some of the best examples of that outside of England just now can be seen in Ireland, where there is a large mobile population of those intent on causing disharmony travelling across Ireland, trying to sow seeds of division in some of the more the more sparsely populated areas. And Scotland should never take it for granted that same thing won't happen here. But like I said a few moments ago, I think the association in pure terms with the far right is probably a strong enough deterrent to hopefully make sure that these things don't arise or play out in the same way that they have in other parts of the country.
What kind of powers do police have here to try and deal with this situation?
One of the things that's often misunderstood, and indeed I've read commentary to this effect over the past number of days, is that the police have the power to stop these marches and demonstrations. Actually, that power sits with local authorities. Now, when, of course, marches and demonstrations take place, there are specific police powers that are available in terms of, that can be given on the day in terms of directing the particular routes or forcing forcing dispersement should that be required, and more importantly, in terms of identification, there's the power that exists to, and it's termed in law as the removing of disguises, but in simple terms, it's the removing of face coverings and balaclava, so that the perpetrators are able to be identified. So, the police powers in terms of dealing with the moment in time are relatively substantial. But in terms of the preventative activity to stop it happening in the first place, those fall to local authorities. But local authorities do not have a carte blanche to simply ban marches and parades because, of course, there are Article 11 rights on freedom of association and peaceful assembly, which the courts have found that local authorities have to weigh very, very carefully before taking the step of trying to ban any march. And even if they do ban a march, that does not mean that the march doesn't take place. It just means that it's an illegal march that still requires to be policed in the same way.
Okay.